Thank you, Jimena, Yolanda, Kate, and all the folks who put this together. Just to introduce yourselves a little more, my name is Laura. As Jimena mentioned, I want to give a quick shout out to some of our members. If you're our members, throw that in the chat. I see that Irina's here from HP. I see that Pam's here from Long Beach. So definitely just want to acknowledge folks who are on the ground doing the work, right? I am one team member and one representative of a whole movement that's based in community, right? And so just want to share, right? I am on Tongva land. I am from Bell Gardens, originally and still now. And I graduated from Cal State LA and Cal State Long Beach. I was going to be an interpreter. And then I realized that there was such a thing as organizing, right? So there was such a thing as creating change in our hoods. And that gave me really a space to funnel my anger towards systemic oppression. But I didn't really know how to do that in a productive way. I didn't really understand the names of these things. And so through various spaces, but especially through East Yard as a member, first and foremost, I learned how to do this work. I learned how to work in community. And I continue learning and growing every day. So that's what I know and hope for today's workshop, right? That we all come with our own expertise, but that we also all come with the willingness to unlearn and learn. So with that, I'll pass it off to Paola to intro herself and then start a little bit of a presentation.
Gracias, Laura, and thank you everyone for being here today. My name is Paola. I use the she, her, ella gender pronouns, and I'm from so-called Compton. I am also a member of East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice. I am a part of the Southeast LA membership space and also one of the youth organizers. And I want to start by sharing a little bit more about myself. I know that often, right, we are defined by our labor, but I want to share other details about me as a person. I was raised in South LA and Tijuana, and so transnationally, and that really shaped my experiences and my identity. I also grew up in apartamentos or apartments, right, which allowed for me to love being with other people and sharing meals specifically. I also love animals, specifically marine animals, and that brings me so much joy. And has led for my own journey in healing, right, to love, respect, and admire our ocean and Mother Earth because she is alive, resilient, healing, and so calming. And I am happy to, to be here with you all. We'll share more about ourselves as we continue this presentation. But my organizing, what I do want to say is my organizing started when I was a youth member at a Black-led and founded collective called Coffee on the Corner in South LA. And I continue to do that work right through East Yard and also through another collective that y'all will be hearing from as part of the series known as the Compton Tenants Union. So shout out to Jimena for really, bridging the spaces that she is a part of, right, with this academic institution. So I'll pass it back to Laura, I believe. Thank you, Laura. Perfect. So we also start with an acknowledgement, right? Laura and I are calling in from Indigenous Tongva lands, and we encourage all of you, wherever it is that you're joining us from, to learn whose land you are on. And I want to take a moment to ask, why is it that we do land acknowledgements, right? To me, it's not just about acknowledging Native peoples and then moving on, because this isn't a performance. This is really an opportunity for us to interrogate our thoughts and our behaviors and ensure that we are not producing this colonial view of land, right? And so this understanding, this practice is really integral to doing this anti-racist, anti-colonial, anti-imperialist work that we seek to do. And so to start, right, with this acknowledgement, I want to encourage all of us to consider this question. Who got displaced for you to be here? for you to be there, right? To acknowledge this question and this harm is fundamental, again, to dismantling these systems of oppression that we're doing. Additionally, I want to acknowledge that our people have been living, surviving through this global pandemic, and that we continue to also fight against white supremacy through the Black Lives Matter uprisings. And most recently, our Asian Pacific Islander comrades and siblings have been under attack, and we also acknowledge this pain. Thank you, Laura. So who is East Yard? I'm gonna share a little bit from what I know, right, in my time being here as a member and as a team member, and I also encourage Laura and other folks who were here, right, to to support in this process, because this history comes with such a tremendous responsibility. East Yard is a neighborhood community-led organization that was created by a group of residents, right? Children, youth, elders in Commerce who came together to fight environmental racism that was caused by the intersection and cumulative impacts of rail yards, right? Like the Union Pacific Rail Yard, freeways, and polluters. And so community members were seeing negative health and environmental impacts in their neighborhoods, including the uprooting and displacement of Japanese gardens in Commerce, which then became, or the space was used for Union Pacific Rail Yard. And so this was around 2001 when community members started organizing and formed East Yard as a result. And so since then, East Yard has grown, and we organize in neighborhoods all along the 710 freeway. And that includes right from East LA and the East Side all the way down through Southeast LA into Long Beach. And I want to acknowledge that part of this expansion has been because of the goods movement and because community members have asked for East Yard to be in these spaces, right? And the goods movement is the way in which products get from the places that they're made or produced to the places where they're sold. And this movement exists through environmental racism. That is policies and actions that intentionally force folks like the communities that we're from, poor working class communities of color, to live near industrial polluting sites. And all of this impacts our physical, mental, emotional, spiritual health, and also leads to the destruction of the environment. And so throughout this work, right, from the beginning and now, East Yard engages in the following structure or foundational work. What is it? How does it affect us? And what can we do about it? Yeah, Laura, did you want to add anything, or any other member? Okay. Okay. Yeah, I just asked because again, it's a big responsibility, y'all. Like this history, it's important for me to make sure that we are sharing, right, the oral storytelling of folks who've come before me. East Yard is the name of the organization, but behind that, I always like to share there's people. There's so much labor, a labor of love that comes with the org, right? And so our work is intersectional, and this slide is here to really uplift that, right? That we need to understand the root of these systems of oppression, which really are white supremacy, imperialism, colonialism. And in addressing that, East Yard uses this intersectional lens. And here I do want to stop to credit Kimberly Crenshaw for coining this term, right? We often use it, but we don't do so with acknowledging credit to a Black scholar author. And so she identified this term to see how our identities overlap and intersect with each other. And so using this intersectional lens is how East Yard and East Yard members, right, address environmental racism. And we use this because we can't address these issues through a truncated lens, right? Our worlds are so complicated, so layered, and we must understand how all these different identities and issues interact with each other. Thank you. And I'm now going to pass it over to Laura to talk about one of the luchas campaigns, right? Actions, movements that East Yard members have been organizing around.
Yeah, gracias, Paola, for grounding us in terms of what is Eastern, right? And I have a quick question if folks can react with any reaction around, have you heard about Exide before this? Whether it's, I know it's in like the LA area, or whether it's, you know, a whole breadth of it. Can you react with any way? Thank you, Shirley. Any reaction if you've heard of Exit? Okay, cool, cool, cool. This is helpful. All right. Okay. Thank y'all for those who are able to participate, just to let me know where folks are at. So Exide has a huge, huge history. And I can't go into every detail because that is way longer than an hour. And we want to talk about Exide and more in this hour, right? But Exide is a facility in the city of Vernon, which is a little city just south of city of LA. And Exide was a battery recycler, right? So you would take your used vehicle battery there and they would recycle it, right? To then create more batteries. The issue was, and this operated from the 20s under a different name before it was called Exide, but doing the same type of work, right? 40s and then into now, right? Into more recently when we shut them down. And they would produce these batteries or recycle these batteries, but they weren't doing it adequately. And so lead and arsenic was spewed into our communities, right? I say ours because that included Vernon, but that also included East LA, Commerce, Maywood, Bell, HP, Bell, oh, I already said Bell, BG probably, and I'll go into that probably in a second, and so many other potential cities, right? And so they had huge consequences and nobody was regulating them. And we can get into the regulation after this. But just to give you a quick landscape about, we were able to shut them down. Yay, success, ¿verdad? So that was a huge success for us to be able to shut them down and hold these folks accountable, both the industry itself, which is Exide, and the agencies that have been responsible or accountable to maintain Exide, or weren't right, being responsible and accountable to keep Exide on check. But what happens to all of this pollution, right? What happens to all of this lead that has decades of health impacts for our communities? And what communities are in that, right? Paola mentioned in the previous slide, EJ as intersectional, right? And so Exide is located in an area where we see BIPOC communities, right? Particularly Latinos right now, but even previous to that, right, we had a lot of Japanese Americans um, and poor white folks as well in the community. And so in this area, we see that there's injustice that's allowed to continue, which is what this whole conference is about. When we shut down Exide, one of the issues was that the district attorney allowed for them to walk away without paying. And so DTSC has filed lawsuit. It has not been a great lawsuit. And we have seen ripples of that right come out in the media here and there. But for East Yard members, we've been working on this for a very long time, right? Whether it's hyped in the media or not. And just to give you a little bit of context of what this looks like, Exide has a preliminary impacted area. So right now, there's a certain area that they're looking at that it goes out in terms of how much they polluted. And we're looking at 10,000 properties being in that preliminary area. And that preliminary area is 1.7 radius from the site. From those 10,000 properties, about 7,500 are exceeding the state standard. And we'll talk about the state standard in a little bit as well. And then we will also, and then right now, as of January, they are anticipating cleaning up 2,800 of those homes, right? Just to jump into some of the wins from the beginning till now, right? So from a long time ago, when the Exide was still open, the Commerce, we were able to support, educate, and push the Commerce City Council, which is the neighboring city, which is also where our first office for East Yard has been at, was able to send a letter to the neighboring city of Vernon, where Exide is, to shut down Exide, right? From there, we were able to have, there are two leading agencies in this project who are supposed to regulate. Sorry, I'm trying to like change on the screen here. Anyway, um, where we're trying to push, right, or who should have been regulating Exide more thoroughly, which are AQMD, the Air Quality Management District, and DTSC, the Department of Toxic Substance Control, right? Y'all may know very well of these, but I want to make sure that I explain acronyms because we don't make assumptions here, right? Everyone's in various levels of knowing who these agencies are and what they do. And so both of these agencies, AQMD and DTSC, were in charge of regulating Exide. We were able to have AQMD lower their lead emission standards. And that gave us, because Exide was out of compliance for that, we were able to temporarily shut down Exide while we continued building a case. Then we were able to pressure the Department of Justice to shut down Exide permanently. And that was, as most of you know, the big win. We then said we need to sample soils because they said, cool, we're gonna start with cleaning up 2 homes. And at first, Exide was like, we cleaned these 2 homes, we're good now. And we are like, no, that's not how that works. And so we did a lot more testing and sampling while DTSC was in charge of doing this work, it was East Yard who really helped support making sure that folks registered to get their homes sampled and then later sign up to be cleaned. And understand also the reports, because the lead sample reports are not very easy to understand. So anyway, we expanded soil sampling. We were able to pressure Governor Brown to secure 176.6 million for the cleanup of the site because DTSC doesn't fundraise. And so when Exide shut down, they were like, okay, they shut down, now they're gone, and that's that. No one was going to clean the site. There are many sites like this across the nation, which we call brownfields, which are also abandoned sites that are polluted, right? So if you've seen in your hood, right, a land that maybe has been not developed in a long time, you should look into it. It may be a brownfield. That's the case here in the LA area where land is super hard to come by, super expensive. And so some of the only lands that are vacant are lands that are brownfields, right? Because whoever moves in there would need to clean up that toxic site, right? So back to this toxic site, they had no money. And so it was on us to make sure that we got funds through whatever mechanisms we could to be able to start the cleanup of this site. Unfortunately, the cleanup of this site is still under the Department of Toxic Substance Control, which, yes, that is the same agency that allowed Exide to continue polluting for decades. And the reason is because no other agency will house this cleanup. The Department of Public Health for LA County did not want to get involved with this cleanup. And I can imagine why, right? This is very complex matter. So we got the 176.6 million to start cleaning. We then were able to work on a battery fee bill. So when we first passed it, it was $1 out of every battery that you purchase goes into this fund to be able to clean any pollution left by lead smelters across California. So that was another huge win for us because that's sustained funding. That is funding that we know will continue coming, not just a one time, right? And now, 2 years ago, about we were able to make this bill a permanent bill, and now it's $2 for in every battery fee bill. We were able to also pass a workforce development program that is based in local hire. The reason local hire is really important is because a lot of these contracts go to the trades, what we call the trade unions, and these are mostly white folks who are not from the community, who usually live in affluent communities, who could get these good union jobs, right? And what we wanted was an opportunity for our folks in our hoods who live in this situation to be able to really, one, get these jobs that are good paying jobs, but two, they know and are fully invested in a good cleanup process because they live here, right? So we were able to successfully pass that as well. So that's some of the wins, right? And so just to reiterate, because I know this is a lot of information, I'm so sorry, but our members have spent years talking about these things. So this is as brief as we can get without getting too in depth, right? And so we have worked a lot. We've done our research. One of the researchers that I wanted to highlight today was a collaboration that we did with USC Environmental Health Centers. And shout out to Jill from that area too that helped us create this. And so we worked on this baby teeth study. So more recently, what we're finding is that baby teeth are good indicators of when you are exposed to lead. Okay. So, and the ultimate results, which I'm not going to get into because I can't go over the entire infographic and study, but you can look it up. Is that before a baby is born, when the baby is in the mother's stomach, this baby is already being exposed to lead, right? In their second and third trimester, this baby is already coming out impacted with their health because of Exide, right? That's what this whole study showed. But just to give y'all a brief context that y'all see here, in 30 years, there was 7 million pounds of lead that was spewed specifically from Exide into our hoods, right? And so here you see our hoods, our neighborhoods. So you see this white area in the bottom is the city of Vernon. And here on the around it, you see these other cities: Boyle Heights, East LA, Commerce, Maywood, HP. And then so there's some more down south of that, right? And you'll see that some of them may be a little redder, right? And that the redder they are, obviously, red's typically associated with bad. So that means that their levels of lead are even higher, right? But all the yellow ones, some of those like blue-green ones, all of that is above the state standard. And we'll look at that in the next image as well. But as you can see here, 97% of the properties that were tested exceed the state threshold, which is 80 parts per million. No lead level is safe. If you walk away with anything from today from Exide, is no level of lead is safe. But the state does have a threshold, which is 80 parts per million. And so most of our areas, if not all of the areas that we tested, exceed that 80 parts per million. Here are some of the health effects of lead. So if you've never heard of, oh, what does lead do to my body? That is the most important part to our communities, knowing how that impacts us, right? And it starts from childhood to adults, and that includes brain damage. It includes stunted growth, problems in learning and behavior as well. For adults, it includes things such as headaches, right? A lot of folks suffer from migraines, memory loss, high blood pressure. I have high blood pressure since I was young, right? Kidney disease, joint pains, right? And then this is what I wanted to show you also is this. I love this image because I really want to focus on the center image where you see the very bold red line. That is the state threshold, okay? These little dots that you see to the right of that are the tooth samples with the lead amount in them, okay? And here you see the ones that are bolded circles, like here you see that Boyle Heights one, that's infancy, and then some are during pregnancy. And you see here all of the lead levels, whether you were exposed during pregnancy or into infancy, are above the state standards for the samples that we collected. So every single child was already disproportionately impacted by lead in our hoods, right? So I just want to highlight that because that's not normal, right? Part of what we always talk about at East Yard is we normalize things that we don't have to, right? These things are not normal, right? How many of us grew up with the rail yard, with train tracks as our backyard, right? The freeway is the wall that separates my elementary school from the 710 freeway, right? That is not normal, right? So I want to just spend a second on this graphic to let y'all know these results are not normal. Not every community has this, right? So I just wanted to highlight that. And so that's just to give y'all the severity of the impacts. And there's so many more statistics and things like that that we don't have time to get into today. But I want to get into what do we want? What are some of the goals, right? Because that's what we should always operate from. And so we want to make sure that the radius expanded. When we started, I told y'all that there was a preliminary impact area. That's the 1.7 mile radius. Again, it's preliminary. Oh, and while I talk a little bit about this, please look at the image on the right. That is what a cleanup site looks like for Exide. So just so y'all know. And so that was never meant to be the final step, that 1.7. That was never stated that that was the entirety of the impact of Exide. We know that the Exide area is larger than 1.7 miles, right? And we have a study from LA Department of Public Health that shows that the way the wind blows could be as far as 4.5. And so that's why we want the radius expanded to that area. Another thing we want is making sure we're addressing the health impacts, right? You just saw in the previous one that this is multi-generational, right? And so we want to make sure that there's accountability for these health impacts, right? If I'm impacted, if my health is impacted, why do I have to pay my medical bills when that's not my fault, right? So that's something for y'all to consider. We want full cleanup. So I haven't talked at all actually about the cleanup, but the cleanup right now, which you can see here, one site, that's exactly how it's done. There's a map created based on results. And based on that, they go, whoever has over 400 parts per million, right? Remember, the state threshold is 80 parts per million, okay? But what they're saying is if you are above 400 parts per million, right? If that's your soil level, then we will clean your home, okay? If it's under that, we will not. That is what DTSC has said up until now. If it's under that, we will not. So we have folks who are at 350 parts per million of lead who do not anticipate ever having their homes cleaned and will continue living in what we now know is toxic waste. This is toxic waste that we're living in, right? Folks who have the financial ability to are concretizing their homes, right? Because you're just like, well, I know the soil's polluted and I know they're not going to come clean it. So I'm just going to pour concrete over it, right? Which doesn't resolve the issue when we go back to environmental justice and restoring land back to what it should be, right? So this is, again, super complex, right? But to get back to having a full cleanup, right now, because they're doing it on a house or property by property basis, they're cleaning up the houses who are just most polluted, and they're not doing it block by block. They are not doing it city by city, right? It's being one house by one house. So you can see this house being cleaned. This is a house in Commerce that is being cleaned. And the next door neighbor's house is not. It's very possible that it may never be cleaned. And so when folks are moving this soil, there's a high possibility for recontamination, right? Because that's getting moved, right? The next door neighbor has lead. They may not have 400 parts per million, but they have lead. So what's happening if their soil's not cleaned? Their soil, the wind picks up, it's going back into the neighbors whose home was just cleaned. And so that is not an effective way to clean our communities, right? Additionally, the inside of the homes isn't cleaned, right? They do like horizontal surfaces cleanup. They do not do attics, they do not do roofs, and they do not do underneath the houses. So that is not a thorough cleanup of a home. Okay, and in addition to, we have heard and seen many issues with the cleanups, folks not being given what they asked for, water pipes being broken, etc. So there's a multitude of issues that is happening currently with the cleanups. And then social impacts, we have problems, right? I mentioned earlier, there are problems with learning and behavior. So a lot of things that we attribute to like, oh, they just have ADD or they just don't pay attention, right? What we're seeing is that all of this is attributed to lead, right? That's again not our fault. And how do we deal with that? And then accountability, wanting to make sure that there is accountability, transparency with how the money is being used, transparency and what's getting done, transparency to make sure we continue having the cleanup. Okay. So that's a little bit about Exide. But what I really also want to bring up, as this is environmental racism, Exide is one site of so many that we have in our hoods, right? That little gray spot that you see there in the middle, that's the city of Vernon, and Exide is located in that area. Um, and so you see, as I mentioned, right, red means not good. Okay, red means not good. And so want to just show y'all that this is the Cal Enviro screen. So you're welcome to Google it and can find it on that. It measures um, pollution, impacts various pollution. So water pollution, air pollution, traffic, pesticides, and then it measures health impacts, so cardiovascular, asthma, things like that. And then socioeconomic, so language, high school education, things like that. And I'm sorry, moving a little bit faster because I'm like, we're running out of time. We have a lot that we want to talk about. But so these red areas are definitely BIPOC communities. And you see that there's green somewhere in this map, right? So green areas do exist. They just don't exist in our hoods, right? And so we're trying to change that, right? Because we deserve that. And so here, for example, right, Paola's from Compton. So you see Compton right here, red. That little dot right there is where I live, which is also red, right? Jimena's out here in Linwood. She's red, orange, depending on where she's at. So we're definitely heavily impacted by that. And so I just wanted to mention these impacts are not just a case by case industry. This is systemic. These are policies and rules that regulate what we do. And so when we talk about our members, when we talk about our community, what our role is, one is to make sure that everybody understands this, right? But two, that we're building the capacity so that we can change rules and policies, right? So we do win on a business by business basis, but we also win on a policy and rule level. We need to do both, right? So I just wanted to echo that because there's so many more Exides, maybe in your hood, that y'all should be looking into. And so I'm gonna pass it off to Paola.
Thank you, Laura. And so I know that our time is a little bit limited, but we'll try to get through as much of this activity as we can so that then we can answer some of folks' questions. This next part is really to talk more about environmental racism, right? And how that has framed your own personal experiences. And so we are going to do a series of questions and ask y'all to respond in the chat, okay? So for this one that you see on here, type me in the chat if there's a factory or a building that releases smoke near your home, your school, or a local park. Okay, we're already seeing some folks who are saying me, a bunch of folks acknowledging that. Yeah, thank you. And again, right, going back to what Laura said, this is not normal, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Can you go to the next one, Laura? Type me in the chat if there's a railroad track or a rail yard near your home, again, your school or your park. Hmm. Yeah, this again illustrates, right, that it is the cumulative impacts of all of this, right? That there's polluters, there's warehouses, there's refineries, and then there's also rail yards, right? And then there's also all kinds of other things that combined impact our health so much. Next slide, Laura. Type me in the chat if there's a freeway near your home, your school, or a park again. Yeah, more folks are saying me. Okay, thank you. Now type me in the chat if you or someone you know has asthma, bronchitis, or other respiratory illnesses. Me, yes. Yes. Thank y'all for sharing and indulging in this. I think I want to note from these series of me's and this last one in particular that that's something that drove me and that I've heard other members talk about, right? Like our own lived experiences specifically with these health conditions and thinking critically about it. Why is that, right? Why is it that most of the kids in my family have asthma? If asthma actually isn't passed on, right? Asthma is something that can be prevented. And so why is that, right? And asking those questions is what led me in part to join East Yard and to bridge my lived experiences with environmental racism. And so we're going to encourage you all to go into breakout groups really quickly. And I don't know how much, Kate, maybe you can let us know depending on time, but quickly share your gender pronouns, your hood, and how has environmental racism shaped your experiences. And here I do want to highlight, right, that this is not a race to get the right answer, right? We're asking you all to practice radical vulnerability. And in that way, right, you are challenging any colonialist thought that you have in your mind, right? And this is where we begin to unlearn you know, these systems of oppression and envision new worlds. And so you're going to go into breakout rooms with like 2 to 4 people.
And Paola, how long do you want them to be in there? Just so they can manage their time.
Maybe looking at the time, maybe 5 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you all.